Welcome back to CRO Stories, a RevOps Corner segment where we interview brilliant chief revenue officers to see how the best in the biz are helping B2B SaaS companies grow. I'm Rachael Bueckert. I'm the marketing manager here at Union Square Consulting, and joining me today is JD Miller, the advisor and former chief revenue officer at Cantata, as well as operating advisor for Rothschild & Co. Thank you, JD, for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Rachel. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So how about you started us off with a little bit of your background?
Absolutely. So I went to college thinking I was going to be a lawyer. I had an undergrad in communication, philosophy, and literature, which is a great pre-law curriculum. But
Mhm.
after I interned in the White House and realized that I didn't want to be an attorney, I looked at those degrees and I thought, you're not going to be a professional philosopher. You're not going to be a professional literature comparer. So it must leave your communication degree as the thing to get into. It was the late 90s. And so I wound up working on a master's in how social networks form online and then began a career working for a .com. Over the next 25 years, it's been a series of progression from being a sales engineer to an individual contributor to sales leadership, CRO, CMO, country president, all in B2B tech companies, generally always owned by private equity, and usually an integration of a UK and a US company coming together for the first time.
Awesome. That internship in the White House sounds really interesting.
Yes, I was not the most famous of the Bill Clinton White House interns, but
Yeah.
it was an important experience for me nonetheless.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, what's made you realize you wanted to journey into the chief revenue officer role?
Yeah. So, it was just the natural progression. The
Mm,
first company that I worked for, we were 26 employees, and 6 years later, we were 6,000 employees with a $9 billion valuation. And so
mhm,
that first experience, kind of going from very small .com to very large publicly traded companies is one that, had a lot of lessons to be learned. And early on, I said, there's a lot that's repeatable here. And so as
mhm.
I then looked for the next jobs, it was constantly, where do we find a company that's, maybe not 26 people, but maybe 20 million, 30 million in revenue on that growth journey. And I constantly found that as I got there, there were things that I had seen in the past and could replicate and repeat, which would help us get to the next level. And that's actually what
Mhm.
private equity is about too. I sort of say it's like house flipping. They start with a
Right.
company that's got good, strong bones, and then you do the things you know how to do, and suddenly it's worth more later on. And so, you know, looking
Mhm.
at that experience over and over again, it just naturally progressed into sales leadership, and then ultimately the CRO seat a couple of times.
Awesome. And that's really great because I feel like you can just learn these skills and learn this blueprint. And I mean, every business is going to be different, of course, but once you have, the blueprint down, you can go almost anywhere, I feel, and be able to make a real impact in that company.
Absolutely. So much of my
Yeah.
job has been, stepping into a company, leading it for 2 or 3 years, helping do, a couple of good things. It's often, building on the data that they have and getting some
Mhm.
better kind of strategic leadership in place, and then leaving it better than you found it and moving to the next. And that actually
Mhm.
is why I wound up writing the book. The CRO's Guide to
Yeah.
Winning in Private Equity is sort of the collection of those blueprints, best practices, and experiences to speed the journey for other folks.
Yeah. And that's coming out in January, I believe.
January 14th. Yes, it's
January
available
14th.
for pre-order
Awesome.
today on Amazon and everywhere good books are sold.
Awesome. Cool. So is it that different doing this stuff for private equity company or their portfolio companies and companies that aren't backed by private equity?
So I think private equity creates a lot of urgency. As
Mm,
investors, there is usually a time frame that they want to be involved in the business and see results. And usually it's, somewhere between 3 and 5 years. And so I think the skills are
mhm,
exactly the same, whether you're owned by private equity or not. But that PE ownership definitely gets everyone's attention on what are the metrics of the business today? What are the metrics of the business we want to see at the end of the journey? And how can we really quickly get there? And the
right.
good news is, it's all the basic stuff that everyone benefits from. So CROs, not just chasing a number and every week forecasting am I going to hit the number or not, but looking at all of those underpinnings of what are the leading indicators of conversions from marketing? What are our
Mhm.
sales velocity look like? And how can we inspect it, improve it, report on it, and continue to measure it? Ultimately gets us to a better place in a short amount of time.
Yeah, because it's not, I mean, when you're working with private equities and stakeholders, it's not just about, how are we hitting our numbers? It's they want to know all of the little details in between and how are you getting there and like what are the evaluations of certain things and the profitability of the company because that all rolls into they're going to be an exit or, there's going to be a merger. That's stuff that they need to know.
You're exactly right. And I think that data can really inform what your strategy needs to be. A
Hmm.
couple of jobs ago, I was hired into a role where the company thought that they had a sales problem. And of course, that's usually why
Hmm.
they wind up hiring a new CRO.
Yeah.
It's not they're not getting the results that they want. And so as they interviewed and recruited me, they said, you're going to have to come in and turn over the talent to the sales team and really teach the sales team some new stuff. When I
Hmm.
got on board and I started digging in, I looked at the talent of the sellers and I looked at their data and I saw that our sellers were actually winning 33, 35% of the time. That's a
Hmm.
really great win rate. So I was like, if we're not getting the results we're looking for and the win rate is up, what else is happening? And I started to look at marketing conversion rates and their MQL to SQL conversion was like 22%. And all of a sudden the light went on. It was like,
Yeah.
hey, you're spending all of this money in marketing. They're creating a ton of marketing qualified opportunities. And they were going to board meetings month after month saying, here's another 1,000 opportunities I created. But 80% of them were getting rejected by the sellers immediately. And so, when you look at that data point, it said, okay, this isn't a sales problem. This is an ICP problem. How do we align sales and marketing on what does a good lead look like? What's the right industry or what's the right persona? And so, and as the CRO at that company, I was actually running both sales and marketing. So they both landed on my plate. It wasn't a finger pointing game. It was like, okay, I thought I was going to come in and teach new sales processes and upgrade the sales team. Instead, we're going to do a whole marketing map and we're going to really talk about ICP and we're going to really design, persona targeting. Because if we can get those MQL to SQL conversions up by targeting the right people, the
Yeah.
revenue is going to flow from the end.
Yeah. And then also that comes down to go to market efficiency as well, because the more money you're spending on marketing that you're just like throwing into a whole, getting leads, these people that aren't ever going to convert, sales isn't even going to talk to them because they're terrible leads. You're wasting all of that money. So shifting that focus, you're not only selling more, but you're putting your budget to better use and getting more ROI from all the marketing dollars that you're spending.
You're exactly right.
Yeah.
Today I get to sit on boards and serve as a board advisor to a variety of companies that are owned by different private equity firms. And I was talking to
Hmm.
one of their marketing leaders today about that efficiency metric. And they have a
Yeah.
product that only applies in certain geographies of the world. But we were starting to look at their web traffic, and organic SEO was generating the biggest percentage of their organic SEO was coming from geographies that their product can't support. And so, it's
Mm,
this exact discussion about
yeah.
what's the money we're spending? What are the things that we're doing that's generating this traffic? What's the money we're spending on that? And how do we reallocate it to a market that we play better in? Because that's where
Hmm.
you're going to get results. But I think a lot of times, the companies that I work with are usually, maybe 20, maybe 50 million in ARR, and then they're growing to 200, 300 million. A lot of times that's a transition point where you've had a founder run your company for a while, you get to 20 or 30 million, and then all of a sudden you have to become this, big global player with all of the processes and all of the
Yeah.
structure that's going to help you scale globally. And suddenly that means that you're looking at a lot of data and you have access to a lot of data you just never did before. So it's really kind of, you know, skills and tools and techniques to help grow your company beyond what one person can personally do.
Yeah. And so when you walk into an organization like this, they're 20 million, 50 million in ARR. What is kind of like the first thing that you do or you have done in the past to get them to a place where their operational maturity is at a level that they can withstand that level of scale that they're wanting to go to?
Yeah. So first of all, it's a lot of listening and it's a lot
Mhm.
of asking. It's a very rare company actually that goes from startup to 20 million.
Yeah, it is.
Most startups fail, before they've even gotten $1 million in revenue. So the
Mhm.
fact that you've gotten to be 20 million already means you're a huge success. And so a lot of my first work is understanding what did you do to get there? And who are the key players and what are the things that they're doing? Because a lot of times a company will top out at that level because it's
Mhm.
the maximum number of customers that I can personally manage. And, suddenly I've got to hire a second, a third, or a 10th salesperson and have everyone doing things exactly the same way that I did or the founder did. And so one of the first things that I'm doing is really understanding what success looks like and documenting it into a playbook that then we can go off and hire and teach people to do the same things that the earliest founders and the most successful people did. And the good news then is it frees up those early folks to move on to solve the next big problem that only they know how to do.
Right. Yeah. And those problems get even bigger as you scale as well. So, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We just finished the presidential election in the States, and,
Hmm.
a previous president said, by definition, the only problems that end up on my desk are the problems that no one else could solve, because it's kind
Yeah.
of worked its way up. And same thing with, company CEOs and company heads of sales is, if you've done a good job of teaching your frontline teams how to do the
Hmm.
routine stuff, the exceptions are going to come to you. But the better you are at teaching your team to solve those problems, the exceptions that are making it there are going to be increasingly more complicated.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why you get paid the big bucks.
We hope.
We hope. Yes. That's the hope. All right. And so, in terms of annual planning, I really wanted to dig into annual planning with you because I know you have a lot of information on this. And we recently published our own framework on annual planning and like how we tackle creating annual plans with our clients and executive communication and creating scenarios and assumptions and all these things. So I wanted to get your perspective on it as a CRO, your
Yep.
experience coming into companies and seeing where they're at with the current way that they're tracking their metrics, the metrics, like what metrics they are tracking, and how you went from there to helping them create annual plans that are driven by data and real data that comes from the truth of what's happening in your business and
Yep.
not just, inaccuracies or hopes and dreams or assumptions.
This is one of my favorite topics.
Yeah.
It's the first chapter of the book. It's probably also the longest chapter of the book. Um, because when I was an individual contributor, I had no idea where my quota came from. I knew that I had a quota.
Mhm.
I thought someone plucked it out of the sky. And the next year I had a bigger quota and I had no idea how they got there. And, the annual plan is the core thing that's in a well-run company is gonna assign those with sanity. And so it's one thing for a CRO to know, I've got to go sell $50 million of revenue next year. The annual plan really helps them align everyone on how are we going to get to that 50 million? Because it's not just show
Mhm.
up to work tomorrow, make some calls, sell something and tick a little bit closer and hope that we get there. You actually have to start by breaking down what are all the revenue streams. So a chief revenue
Mhm.
officer, they're in charge of every kind of revenue to the company. So there's new logo sales. You're going to go win a bunch of new customers. You have a bunch of
Mhm.
existing customers that you need to renew. You have a bunch of existing customers you're going to sell more to. And then maybe you've got some other streams going on. So how do we break that $50 million down into a certain target for new logo, a certain number for renewals and price increases, and a certain number for cross-sell and upsell? And then
Mhm.
you've got to go the next step and start breaking down how do you get to each of those individual goals. So just because you entered the year with $100 million of customer contracts, they're not all going to renew. And you already know from your data. You've got some satisfaction data. You know the people who are calling your help desk all the time are complaining or maybe not using the product. So you can predict some churn. You've also got data on their contracts that say, what's the price increase that they're already signed up for? And then
Mhm.
when does that renewal happen? Because not every customer, comes up equally across. It's not 12 equal months of renewals. You've got sometimes where a ton come in and some that none come in. And so you
Yeah.
can sit down with an annual plan and assign a number, in this case on just renewal and price upgrade increase, month by month, and know what should happen, what your target is, and how you're going to get there. And then you can do the same process for what's my new logo going to look like, and maybe I'm doing new product launches. And what's the seasonality and what's the timing of that new product launch? And then publish in one piece of paper that everyone can see every source of revenue month by month. What's the target? Why did we get
Mhm.
there? And then once you've set the annual plan, I think the next big thing about being a great CRO is being able to then look back at that month by month and be reporting to your team. Are we hitting it? Are we not? What's failing? Why? And how do we course correct?
Absolutely. And I think that is a really big missing piece for a lot of companies. They set the plan, usually just based on hopes or, stakeholders are asking for a number. So they're like, okay, that's the number we got to hit. And
Yep.
then it's kind of set it and forget. And they don't think to like look back on it, either week by week or quarter by quarter and see, okay, like what is happening inside our entire go to market funnel? Where do the numbers not match up? Are we on goal for our targets? And if we're not, what is happening within our organization that's making it like that? And what dials do we need to turn?
That's exactly right. And I think that the better you can lead that conversation, the more longevity you're going to have as a CRO. There was a
Mm-hmm.
Harvard Business Review study came out that said the average tenure of a CRO is 18 months. So by
Yeah.
definition, if I'm only going to sit in that seat for a year and a half and then I'm going to get fired, by definition, a lot of that time I'm running a plan that wasn't my own. And I really think that we're not firing those CROs because they missed the number. I actually think we're firing those CROs because they're not able to tell you why we're missing and what's going to change about it. And
Yeah.
so in my own career, I've been fortunate to have many long tenures and get all the way to the exit.
Mm.
It doesn't mean that I've gone to board meetings every month and said, congratulations, our team is doing so well, we beat our plan. But what I have been able to do almost every time is show up to the board meeting and say, this is the number we're hitting. This is where we're going to do next month or next quarter. And here's
Mm.
why. And so it may not be the number you want, but here's where the shortfall is. Here's what we're collectively going to do to fix it. And can I enroll you that that's the metric we're going to be watching over the next couple of months? Because
Yeah.
if we agree that this is the problem and the root cause, and if we agree that my strategy to fixing it is right, then our board meeting is just about reporting how am I doing on implementing that change, and the revenue is going to come. And I think that's what differentiates a CRO who keeps their job for a long, long time and one who gets shown the door pretty quickly.
Yeah, absolutely. And the only way to be able to get to that point and be able to do that is to know how do you set up your organization to be tracking accurate metrics. And, do you know how to look at those numbers and take insights from them? Do you know what those numbers mean when they come in? So let's say you created an annual plan and, things maybe they're not going the way that they should be. Do you have a story or like some experience that you've had when you've discovered this and insights that you gleaned from it and how you came to those conclusions and how you fixed the situation?
Yep. So a couple of them. We talked earlier about the difference between MQLs and SQLs and seller
Mm-hmm.
skill. But another place where that metric of sales velocity has been really meaningful to me is
Mm-hmm.
is to break down, what's going on in a business. Now, sales velocity it's the number of opportunities you have times your win rate times your average deal size divided by
Mm-hmm.
the number of days. And so if you do that math, it kind of breaks you down into like how many dollars are you bringing in every day? And I was sitting
Mm-hmm.
in a business that, we weren't hitting the goals that we looked for. And I finally said, okay, let's look back at our sales velocity metric and let's look at how many opportunities are we creating? Marketing's creating all the opportunities that they signed up for. What's our conversion rate? Well, we're converting as many as well, right? So that's going really well. How's the skill of our seller? How's our average deal length? That's going really well too. It's 45 days or less. But it was deal size had suddenly changed year over year, and we had built an annual plan that expected a deal of like $90,000 of ARR, and something had happened in the market that all of a sudden our deals were only $70,000 of ARR. So collectively, we were
Mm-hmm.
missing the goal by, we'll do the math faster than I, 20% or something. But doing that next level of data analysis said, okay, it's deal size, that's our problem. What happened? Let's look at the industry. Okay, all of a sudden the industry that we served was going through a downturn. And so they weren't hiring as many people. They weren't, signing up for as many licenses. And our existing accounts weren't calling as frequently saying, I just hired 10 more people, get me more licenses. So all of that was just depressing our deal size and,
Mm-hmm.
ultimately depressing our outcome. So with that in mind, then we could have a really strategic conversation about what are the things we can do to get bigger deals. Okay, maybe we should start targeting our sales and marketing engine further up market than we ever did before. Because here's a whole set of players that we might have thought were too big for us to service, that all of a sudden in this downturn, they're the right size for us. And so kind of
Mm-hmm.
tweaking that, marketing focus, ICP, sales focus is what got us there. A CRO
Mm-hmm.
in a big company, there's tons of data available to you, but you can't possibly know it yourself. And so the other big
Yeah.
thing for me is having a really good revenue ops leader or rev ops
Yeah.
team or a partner like an organization like yours that can help me really diagnose that. A lot of times with private equity,
Mm-hmm.
we come in, we've got to collect all of this stuff really, really quickly. And the organization is often sitting on the data, but they don't know what they've got. And so it's often really helpful for me to bring in a partner agency, a consulting agency that says like, let's do a quick deep dive. And in 4 weeks or 6 weeks, we can get a ton of really good insights that are going to inform our strategy for the next 2, 3, 4 years.
Absolutely. And like that's pretty much exactly what we do at Union Square Consulting is it's just about having, a third party set of eyes that can look at that data and analyze it without any prior bias, like no sales bias, no marketing or no internal bias, and give you that truth of what's going on in the business and the visibility of what's happening so you can make those decisions and make those calls. Because something like that, yeah, like if the problem is at an ICP level, that's a huge domino effect, right? Like that just knocks down everything. Like you said, it was affecting new business sales, it was affecting churn, expansion, like everything. And of course, that's going to make a huge difference to your revenue at the end of the year.
Yeah. And I love that you
Yeah.
talk about a fresh pair of eyes too, because
Hmm.
the thing about growing companies is the company is always changing. And I work with a leader who talks a lot about the ages and stages of a company. And the kind
Hmm.
of summary of his message is the things that you had to do to succeed to get where you are today are the opposite of the things that you're going to do to succeed to get to the next level.
Yeah.
And it kind of makes sense. When you're a small startup and you're doing all this scrappy stuff, like here's where I focused my engine, here's the kind of calls I made, here's the kind of metrics that I did. And all of a sudden it buys you a seat at the table now to play in a bigger pool or a different pond or a different industry. Now, as humans, we look at what was our success skill and we said, oh, what did I do for the last 3 years that got me all the accolades? I'm going to keep on doing that. And
Yeah.
all of a sudden you find the wall of like, geez, I keep doing the same thing, but I'm not getting the same result. It's a great sign that someone from the outside who doesn't have that bias may be able to really quickly tell you, okay, look at the bigger picture. Yes, what you were doing was right for the time that you were doing it. And now all of a sudden you're operating in a different context that you didn't even realize. The water's changed around you, and here's way to shift. And it's often easy small tweaks that'll then unlock a whole nother layer of growth and potential for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the saying, what got you here won't get you there. I think it is.
Exactly right.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. And like having that other set of eyes, somebody who has gone through those growing pains also that you're currently experiencing. So a whole different set of experience of like going through these changes and like knowing what it takes to get to the level that you're trying to get to.
And
Absolutely.
that's what I love about the work that I get to do today. But also,
Yeah.
having been a CRO in private equity is the PE firms, there's a whole
Hmm.
portfolio of companies that look just like you. And so
Yeah.
today at Five Arrows, we've got 35 or 36 companies. I have the luxury, I get to go see all of them. But
Yes.
also, all of our CROs have a network that, I guarantee there's someone else in the portfolio that's having the same challenge around structuring commission or how do I
Hmm.
plan my sales kickoff or whatever it is that you can look to your peers or you can look to your board or your advisors and get connected with someone who says, I've been here before, I've walked this road. Let me tell you the mistakes that I made. So at least you're not going to make that one again and we can make new ones together.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. And so once you have this annual plan created and everything's, tracked out, how do you build on from that throughout the year and make sure that you're moving towards that success?
Yep. So, again, I keep thinking about this military leader that I've worked with who also had this little pithy phrase about, no plan survives its first contact with the enemy, right?
Hmm.
And I also think no annual plan survives its first contact with the field in the real world. But I think it's really important to always have that front and center for us and then implement with our RevOps partners, hopefully, or someone in finance, a cadence that every week we can analyze what
Mhm.
did we expect to have happen? What's really happening, and how do we move that forward? So I have a little flash report that I use, and there's a template in
Okay.
my book that people can download too. But it's just a weekly email that goes to me, all of my sales leaders, every member of my executive team, and part of the board of directors that says, here's a look at the quarter. Here's what our annual plan said was supposed to happen, so far. And now, as of week 2 or week 3 or week 4 in the quarter, here's what's happened so far. And just kind of realign us all again. What were we trying to accomplish? Are we close or are we way far off? And then, when we start veering off course, it can then stimulate what are we going to do about it next? And I think a lot of leaders and a lot of first time sales managers don't want to report that bad news. And they're like, oh, it's not going
Yeah.
really well. I'm going to keep it a secret. Well, that's no good for you because then you get
Yeah.
to the end of the quarter and you're finally going to that board meeting and you've got this huge bad news. And that's the recipe for becoming a leader who gets exited from the business.
Yeah.
If I can communicate with you on a weekly basis, we're starting to tell you the story, one, it eliminates surprise, but two, it also starts to bring some of the best minds to the table to work with you on, okay, so what are we going to do about it? What might we try doing differently that's going to get us to a different result?
Yeah. And like you said, it doesn't always have to be good news, but there has to be news, if things aren't going the right way, it's worse in the long run trying to hide it and trying to, oh, maybe I'll just like fix this on my own and no one will ever know, and it doesn't really work that way most of the time.
Right. Yeah, it's that like
Yeah.
we win together, but we lose alone. And
Yeah.
truthfully, the time you need your team the most is when things aren't going well. And so
Hmm.
you've got to be vulnerable, but you've got to be
Yeah.
open and honest. And like, here's what's happening. I'm not sure what the answer is. Let's bring everyone into the
Hmm.
conversation and hopefully we can figure it out together.
Yeah. And again, like I said, that third party unbiased opinion, right? They're not really worried about, you know, bringing bad news to the table usually because it's
Right.
it's just the truth of what's happening, right?
Right.
Yeah, and
Right.
you can't grow as an organization without knowing what's happening with your
Yeah.
organization.
And it's okay. It's raining
Hmm.
today. That's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Let's go get an umbrella. Let's figure out how big our umbrella needs to be. Let's not pretend it's not wet outside.
Exactly. Exactly. And in terms of like contingencies and preparing for, unexpected things to happen in the year, or maybe some of them are expected or you should expect them, like things like employee turnover, internal churn. How do you build that into your annual plan? Like these things that might completely throw a wrench in the
Yeah.
gears.
Yeah. So this is a huge part of my annual planning template as well.
Mhm.
It's actually, if you go download it, it's this really big, long Excel spreadsheet. But, first of all, you've got to start by thinking, what are the risks?
Mhm.
You shouldn't build an annual plan that assumes every seller is going to be in the seat for your whole year. So let's
Yeah.
work with our HR partners and say, what does turnover look like in our business historically? You know, how long do people tend to stay? What time of year do they tend to leave? And when I build my plan, I'll assign quota out, but let's go plan on, I don't know who they're going to be, but let's take out 3 senior sellers in February because that usually seems to happen. And then the next piece is, once that person leaves, how long does it take our HR to recruit the next replacement? What's the
Yeah.
ramping period? So I might take out, 100% quota performer in February and not expect their replacement to have any revenue at all until September, October, November.
Yeah.
So kind of building all of that in is a really important thing. I think the other
Mhm.
thing is once you've set up your annual plan, you've broken down your number and your goal. It never adds up to what the executive team or the board wants. I've got an annual
Yes.
plan to
Yeah.
do 20 million, and they're like, great, but I really want 30. When
And
we get
then
to that point, let's talk about the bets and let's talk about the guesses. Let me
yeah.
look at my annual plan and show you how I get to 20. And then we can start to add additional lines into our plan that says, okay,
Mhm.
we think we're going to get another $1 million because we're going to do this sales training process. And that should start impacting our conversion rates in
Mhm.
June. You know, we are going to launch this new product and we think we're going to sell, 1 in the first quarter and 3 in the second quarter and whatever. But again, all of those assumptions become things that when we're looking at that monthly cadence, we're saying, where have we gotten to? It's not just you're missing the number. It's you got the new logo you wanted, you got the upsell you wanted. Oh, that product didn't even launch yet. So there's a $500,000 of revenue that, we planned for that isn't here, and the product's not even going to be here for 3 more months. Getting all the voices at the table to understand the why of the miss and what the hopes are for the corrections is a big, big part of the job.
Mhm. And so how much like buffer room do you try to build into your annual plans to account for these contingencies and things that you're not expecting?
Yeah, so this is the big secret of leadership, right?
Oh.
When I was an individual contributor, I just thought the company's goal was, my quota times the number of sellers out there.
Mhm.
So actually, I put out once we've built our plan for what we need in the year, I assign 120% of quota to people in the field. So, I have extra selling bodies and I have slightly bigger quotas so that we've got about a 20% quota for people to miss their number or turnover or things like that. Now,
Mhm.
my managers, they're working to 110% of the goal, and then the executive team is working to 105% of the goal. So usually it's that executive plan, that 105% performance that we're talking about every day. And then the board is seeing just the board plan, which is that, 100% number. So you've sort of built
Okay.
all of these layers and backstops of you go to the board meeting, you're talking about 100. You go to work
Right.
every day, you're talking about 105. You're managing your managers and you're managing your sellers to 110 to 120. And, those kinds of conversations have worked really well for me to actually deliver what the company must have.
Okay. Yeah, because I've heard that it can be difficult defending that buffer room from the board because, they see like, oh, we could be making like 10 million more here. Like, why don't we push for that? And in the back of your head, you're just like, well, that's like my contingency plan. So,
Yeah, you're a sandbagger. You
yeah.
know, for me, it's being bold to the board and showing your work. It's saying, here's the plan and
Yeah.
here's the roll up of how I got here, and that's the number that I'm delivering. Where do
Hmm.
you think 10 million is going to come from? And let's have a really serious discussion about it. You know,
Hmm.
I worked with a company that spent a nice chunk of change on sales training. Like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
you're going to go to sales kickoff and you're going to go hire this sales trainer who's going to do this thing. It's okay. That's great, and it's important, and we should do it. But don't
Hmm.
expect me to sell $10 million as a result of that training the next month. So let's
Yeah.
just like realistically say, if you think there's another 10 million, where's it coming from and why? And then again, where we began, let's go back to the data. The best predictor of future performance is past performance. So
Hmm.
what does the data say is most likely to happen? And then any of the bets that we're making on increasing, why do we think it's worth the volume or the size that you're hoping for?
Yeah. And in terms of having those, probably sometimes hard conversations with the board and other executives, do you have any like tips or advice on how to approach the board with something like that when they're pushing for more and more and you have to like, you know, temper their expectations down?
You've just got to be bold and brave and say it.
Yeah.
Because for me, I wind up telling my boards a lot, like, you might not like the news that I'm delivering to you, but you can count on it. And,
Mm,
we might have a really heated exchange about you should do more, and I say I can't do more. And that might be really tough. But the tougher conversation is if I cave to your pressure and sign up for a number that I don't believe in and I can't deliver. Because
yeah.
then 4, 5, 6 months from now, you're going to say, you signed up for this number. Why aren't you doing it? It's time for me to go find someone else. And that I think
Yeah.
is again why, that average CRO tenure is often a year and a half. Because the
Yeah.
CRO hasn't done a good job managing the board's expectations on, what's realistic, what you can count on, and what you want. And then from a forecasting
Yeah.
perspective, I also love to, forecast a couple of numbers. So I manage my teams and I talk to my boards about here's our commitment, here's our
Mhm.
best case, and then here's our real forecast. So as we think about the business, I can commit we're going to sell this much this month. I know that we're going to do that in our sleep. If we
Mhm.
closed everything that's in the pipeline, the very best we possibly could do is in this number. And guess what? All those stars aren't going to line either. So our
Yeah.
forecast is going to be somewhere between those two, and that's what we should manage the business on.
And I wanted to go back really quick on the topic of, employees turning out and employee morale and all that stuff. How, in your experience, how have you managed to keep top performers around and try to limit as much employee turnover as you possibly can, in terms of, let's say, comp planning, territory planning, the way that you set their quotas
Yeah.
so that it's, attainable and not making them
Yeah.
feel like, oh man, I'll never be good at my job.
Yeah, hugely important question. I think you've got to start by, again, looking at your past performance and having a pretty realistic expectation of what's possible. Now, my experience as a leader is you've got a happy organization if about 80% of your sellers are hitting about 80% of their quota. You know, most aren't going to be 100%, but if you can get them to at least 80, they feel like they're close enough. And there's always
Mhm.
going to be, a handful of sellers who have that giant deal that there are enough walking around that are at 110 or 120%, or that one seller who, oh my gosh, this year I just got a $500,000 commission check, that the culture becomes sellers thinking, okay, well, I'm at 80%, and that's not that far off of where they are. And look at all the money that they got. So I think,
Mhm.
from a quota setting perspective, that's one thing we could do. From an expectation setting perspective, I also like to kind of manage the year's expectations that it's really easy in the beginning of the year. Now, most
Okay.
companies, if we've got a $100 million goal, They're not, most companies aren't going to do 25, 25, 25, 25. It's just not the nature of the business. And
Mhm.
so I like to set an annual plan that whatever history says we're going to do in the first quarter, I like to take it down even a little bit further so that, we shape the year with an easy to hit number in Q1, January, February, March. We're saying we hit our goal, we beat our goal, because that's so good for culture. Even if I artificially deflated the goal a little bit and I know Q3 or Q4 is going to be a little bit harder than it should be, it's way better to come out the gates in a culture of winning and celebrating your first 2 months and going to the first 2 months of board meetings saying, we're 103% of plan. So much better than, oh, January, we were close, but we were only 95% of plan. And everyone's like, oh, you're kind of losers. And how did we just sign off on this plan and you're missing it already?
Yeah.
That's when people start getting scared and cutting costs. So that
Yeah.
really helps culture. And then of course in tech sales, I love a good sales club. And I know that there are a lot of other organizations don't have them, but in tech sales, you make 100% of your quota and you and your partner are going to go on a vacation somewhere. And I
Yeah.
make a really big deal about that. I also like to plan it where we announce the winners in January, but the trip itself is in like May or June. So those very top performers are going to celebrate you. You and your partner are going to go to Hawaii or Bali or some fabulous, four-letter island vacation, but you're going to have to wait around till May. So to do it, and that top
Yeah.
performer will stay for that trip, and suddenly they're
There you
halfway
go.
through the year and they're ready to move on. They're ready to keep on going.
Yeah. And who doesn't want to stay at a company where, like, if you just do your job well, you get to go on a free, awesome vacation?
Oh my God, it's amazing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so, in terms of like helping your reps, reach their potential and succeed and feel good about their jobs and stick around, how do you work comp plans and like territory plans into that and making sure that things are fair and equitable and they're set up for success?
Oh, yeah, I think territory planning is really critical to that.
Mhm.
I worked at an organization that sold to a pretty niche industry, and there were 10 big players in the industry. And the day I walked in, the territories were set up that eight of those 10 big players were in one seller's territory. And, there was all of this perverse stuff going on where the manager thought that that seller was like the smartest seller in the business, and all the
Right.
other sellers were terrible. And
Yeah.
actually, when I dove into it and I met the seller, I was like, actually, you're not very talented. I went on to sales calls. I was like, you're winning in spite of yourself. When we rebalanced that territory and he only had one of those Big Ten, but everybody else had one of those Big Ten too, suddenly everyone was performing really well. And
Yeah.
we won a ton of those. So I do think when you start the year, sellers don't want to see their territories shift.
Hmm.
But, I think you get once a year or maybe once, during the PE ownership, an opportunity to say, we're going to re-level the playing field and give everyone a fair chance to compete. Because if I give everyone a fair opportunity, you know, you start to see actually performance differences between people instead of territory differences between people.
Right.
And then the second thing is just like we talked about with annual plans, the same way I tell my board, here's how I'm going to build up to our annual number. When I give you your territory and your comp and your quota for the year, I need to give you that plan too and show you. I call it sort of a win creation waterfall in the book. You know, your quota is $1 million. Our average deal size is $100,000. And so the way for you to make your number is you got to do 10 deals. Or, maybe we've got a skew that you're going to make your number by doing one slightly larger deal, seven regular deals and four small deals, whatever that is. And then also, what are all the precursors to that? So based on your previous metrics, you won one out of every four deals. So you need to have 40 opportunities in your pipeline all the time. And how did you get 40 opportunities? You had to have this many discovery calls or this many cold calls or, work with your BDR on that. And so it's showing people a credible plan that says, here's your territory, here's the opportunity that, here are the number of companies that exist in it, here's how many you have to get to different stage. And, now let's just start working week by week on, are we putting in the things in the early stages that are going to lead to the result? And generally you get a successful team as a result.
Yeah. And going back to what you said, or your story about the sales rep who, things were probably going very good for him. He wasn't the best seller. And then, these things changed around and he kind of got called out, like
Yeah,
on
he probably
on
wasn't so happy in that
he probably
story.
wasn't so happy. So like that's the thing about making these changes that are for the betterment of the business at large, right? Like it's not always going to make everybody happy because there are sometimes people are riding off of inaccurate data or misconceptions and stuff like that. And I think that's another big hurdle that we face at Union Square Consulting is, getting everybody on board, because maybe there is a decision maker, maybe there's somebody and a part of the team, the leadership team, or even, the smaller teams, the sales team, marketing, who don't want to be on board because they're worried about what that might mean, like what these process changes might mean for them and their
That's
targets
right.
and stuff like that. Like a big one, if we're changing our ICP criteria and the marketing team is judged on their MQL attainment, right? We change ICPs around and suddenly MQLs go way, way, way down because now our ICP, like we're focusing
Right.
on a much smaller group of people. But these people, we're converting way more of them. We're making way more revenue from them. But marketing doesn't benefit from that because they're just judged by MQLs. So for them, it's like, what do I do?
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think these are the hard cultural questions, but I think we
Mm-hmm.
get through them by always remembering it's the company first. It's not the
Yeah.
individual.
Mm-hmm.
The company's context changes all the time. And can we all align on what are the company's values? That we're a company that is fair. We're a company that's trying to drive results. And
Yeah.
then what is the company's strategy to get there? And then I think all the individuals can have a very candid and clear conversation about, do you align with the company's values and do you align with the company's goals? And if we have a conversation about that and not about how do we make the company adapt to you,
Mm-hmm.
you get to a great result. And
Yeah.
sometimes that might be like, Rachel, when the company's values and goals were this way, you loved
Mm-hmm.
it and you thrived in it. And now we're moving on to a new phase that you might not like so much. And that's okay. And if you don't want to continue on that journey, that is fine. And I am happy to go help you find another company that looks like what we used to be, where you can thrive and keep doing that.
Yeah.
Converse is true too. If you can let go of the past and you can say, it's still the same values, we still are driving for excellence, and I
Mm-hmm.
understand the new strategy and I'm going to be a little uncomfortable, you might have a very long career through the next couple of phases of it too.
Yeah.
Um, and that's great. But we get
Absolutely.
in problems when, we
Yeah.
have that one seller that, I used to be the top seller because all the
Yeah.
deals were mine. We can't handicap the whole organization to continue to
Exactly.
make sure you're always the top seller.
Yeah. And like sometimes I like it's the CRO's job to convince the other executive team that, with certain process changes, there should probably be different quota and target changes as well. So like for my example with the marketing team, they should be a part of their what they're judged on should be revenue. They should be held
Right.
accountable to revenue rather than just MQLs. And
Good.
once things change where we have less MQLs, but those leads we are getting, they're creating so much more revenue, then marketing now is focused on revenue instead of, they're focused on the thing that's better for the business as a whole.
That's right. The reward structure has to reward the things we want to have happen in the
Exactly.
business. And that
Yeah.
means that the levers of my comp plan are going to change. And it
Hmm.
does mean that, structurally, you might shift from, we might have been a small company that I did everything. And now all of a sudden we've got a hunting team and a farming team, or we have an
Yeah.
enterprise sales team and a mid-market and an SMB team that all have different goals. That's
Hmm.
fine. The hard thing, but the important thing is that we can clearly communicate it to everyone in the company. They all
Yeah.
understand the company picture. They all understand their piece and how it ties together.
Exactly. And I think that's like the heart of alignment, I think, with sales, marketing, customer success. Everybody aligned, communicating between each other for the betterment of the company. Everyone's aligned to the same goals that are for the betterment of the company. And it's not just siloed operations that are driving their own goals.
It's just that it is just that simple, or it's just that
Yeah.
hard.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I believe you are coming up on time here, but this is really great. I really enjoyed this chat with you, JD. Yeah. And so, your book, The CRO's Guide to Winning in Private Equity, where can people find that or order that?
Yeah, best place is on my website, jdmillerphd.com. It has a link that'll take you to all of the places. It's available on Amazon. It's available on Barnes and Noble. It's all over the place. But if you want to start at my webpage,
Mhm.
jdmillerphd.com, I'll point you off to everywhere else you'll be able to find it.
Awesome. And is there anywhere else people can find you on LinkedIn, or do you have a newsletter or anything like that?
Yep. So my personal website again is a great place,
Yep.
but you
Yep.
can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm on Facebook and Twitter as well. Always JD Miller PhD is the handle. You'll find me in all of those
Awesome.
spots.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, JD.
Thank you. It's good to chat.